Hello, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Arna Sahu, host of Arna's News, where on this podcast channel, I aim to eliminate the gender gap in the STEM fields by featuring inspiring female professionals and highlighting their stories and accomplishments to further encourage girls. Today on episode 64.
So I didn't have a destination in mind, and there's nothing wrong with that either. I will just say that there's nothing wrong with not knowing your end point, because it actually gives you the opportunity to pivot multiple times. And I think the idea is just, how are you learning and growing in your job? What kind of things can you get from the next job? How are you stretching and continuing to not be bored, but to learn in every job that you have?
Today on episode 64, I'm pleased to answer our guest Jill Finlayson. As a managing director, Citrus Innovation Hub, director and expanding diversity and gender equity in tech, she leverages the UC's renowned research capabilities across 4 campuses to develop metrics and data insights to inform effective best practices that improve inclusion. Some highlights include Women in Tech Symposium, leadership roundtables, UC Extension courses for HR practitioners, and also hosts the UC Berkeley Extension Future of Work podcast as well. Furthermore, Jill is a technology mentor, alumni council at Tech Women as well. So thank you so much, Jill, for being here today. Before we dive into the questions, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate so much, Arna, your podcast and your mission. It's great to be here. I myself graduated from UC Berkeley. I worked here for several years and then went off and did other things, and we'll talk about that in the course of our interview, but lots of different things for 25 years. And then I came back to UC Berkeley with the opportunity to focus on women in tech and how do we remove systemic barriers to participation.
Yeah, so my first question for you is, tell us a bit about your career path.
So I would say, in short, it is unplanned, but intentional. So what do I mean by that? I look for job opportunities that leverage whatever knowledge and skills I have and offer opportunities for learning and growth. So I didn't have a destination in mind, and there's nothing wrong with that either. I will just say that there's nothing wrong with not knowing your end point, because it actually gives you the opportunity to pivot multiple times. And I think the idea is just, how are you learning and growing in your job? What kind of things can you get from the next job? How are you stretching and continuing to not be bored, but to learn in every job that you have? So in fact, I ended up changing jobs every 3 years, pretty much, if you look back across my career. And what I looked for, I would say, is the commonality, is those growth opportunities, but also alignment with my values. So what was the halo around that job that made me excited about going into it? For example, one job was helping online classified ads. And that doesn't seem like a very social impact sort of thing, but it turns out classified ads were helping to support journalism, and journalism was really struggling to make revenue. And I thought, that's something I can hang my hat on.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. With everything you did, you didn't kind of restrict yourself on the things you wanted to do. You figured out the things that you enjoyed in each role and then tried pursuing those types of passions in other places, regardless of where it may be. And, you tried finding that halo of excitement and, finding the things that you truly love.
Absolutely. And I think that's important. Do more of the things that you like over time and less of the things that you don't like, but always be curious, always follow your passion.
Yeah. And what advice would you give someone wanting to pursue a career similar to yours? And do you have any tips to succeed?
I would say what you would be pursuing is a job that changes a lot. I don't think anybody would want to replicate my career path exactly, but if you want to be able to evolve and change jobs frequently, you need transferable skills. You need core competencies like communication, collaboration, critical thinking, problem solving. Those are transferable skills. So no matter what vertical, technology skills you have, you need those horizontal skills as well. And I would say what set me up for that that success, and I didn't know it at the time, was in high school. I did speech and debate, and I did journalism. And those told you things like, how do you do research? How can you be persuasive? How do you tell a good story? How do you make a data-informed, evidence-based argument? And even, how do you define success? Like, what is your objective? So all of those things, I think, are really important. They also get you a little immune to taking risks, because it's not always going to work out exactly as planned. And I think the other thing to take away from my career path as well is that you don't have to be a STEM major to go into STEM. And in fact, we need everybody in STEM. We need all those different perspectives from humanities and so forth to ensure that we're doing ethical and responsible innovation. So you can take a non-traditional pathway into STEM, which is more what I did. I came into a startup through the marketing lens, but I learned a lot of the technology through being in a startup.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really matter what type of role you're in or what industry you're in. You're always going to have to find these types of resources like good communication skills, good time management skills, and trying to hone in on those types of, tool sets that you can have, and those skill sets. They can really help you in any type of industry. And I really like what you said about it doesn't matter if you don't have a STEM background to get into STEM, because there's so many cross sections that you can do. Like me personally, I'm interested in economics and computer science. So I have the humanities side of things, but I also have the STEM side of things. And it doesn't matter. It's okay if you don't restrict yourself onto one specific thing within STEM, but it's okay if you kind of broaden that interest and, merge something else that you truly enjoy.
In fact, you can't really operate in a silo anymore, because everything is so complex and interrelated that you need to have those kind of skills where you can look at things through multiple lenses and perspectives.
Yeah. And if you're interested in so many different things, like I'll give you a cool example. Like if you're interested in fashion and you're interested in, say, computer science, you could create a cool fashion blog or a cool fashion business, and you can code it up, do so many things, and make so many interesting impacts based on the passions that you have.
In fact, Steve Jobs, who, of course, did Apple, the reason we have fonts on computers was in college, he took a calligraphy course. And so he was like, hey, we should have this on the computer. So you never know where those unexpected connections will be made, and you can leverage something from another sector to solve a problem in technology.
Absolutely. Like what you just said before in the beginning of the episode, I'll just piggyback because there's so many different things that you can truly enjoy. It's like that halo effect of the things that you're passionate about, and you can find a different role that's going to be something else that you're going to be passionate about and carry that experience over.
Absolutely. And I've seen a lot of tech companies have foundations within their company where how can we apply our technology for good? So I know a gentleman who worked at Airbnb, and he said, there's all these displaced people and refugees. We do housing. How can we use Airbnb's platform to solve for refugee crisis housing? So lots of opportunities to take your expertise and then apply it for good.
Yes, and solve so many real world problems. And my question for you is, what is a common myth about your profession that you want to debunk?
So I'm going to give you two. So one, I'm going to focus on sort of the diversity, equity, inclusion, and the other will be around startups and innovation. So the DEI myth is this idea that training will solve all the problems. We just need to do a training and everybody will be inclusive and empathetic and create belonging. When in fact, we know that that's not the case. It's an important foundation and it's an important element, but it's not sufficient. We're never going to be one and done. This is an ongoing effort. And how we build in inclusion is make it part of how we do things. How is our processes? What do our systems say? What criteria do we use? So really embedding DEI into how we do business, not an add-on later, and changing the systems themselves to ensure that bias doesn't creep in certain places. The other thing on innovation and startups, and I encourage everyone to try and do a startup when they're in high school or college, because you learn so much from that experience. And the main myth there is the overnight success. There are no overnight successes. It's a long path. And, the famous saying, I've failed more times than you've tried. that's the story of startups. So it really teaches you resilience, but it teaches you failure is not fatal, right? It is just feedback, and you learn from that and you move on.
Absolutely. Like a lot of people, myself including, we think that, failure is something to be afraid of, which it could be, but there are so many different types of lessons that you can learn. Failure and success is just part of the journey. So, keep on going, keep on doing your stuff, just work little by bit, little by little, and just try to do as much as you can in that day. But also, try finding your passions when you're younger, because it's easier to make mistakes when you're younger, and finding those things. And overnight success, I mean, a lot of people think that, the big guys like Mark Zuckerberg, Stephen Jobs, of course, they had a lot of success, but it wasn't just overnight. There was a lot of things that go behind, the doors that not a lot of people see. Often people hone in onto the results of what happens, excluding the things that might have gone beneath the covers. So there's a lot of things that happen beneath the covers that not a lot of people see.
I have a colleague who refers to failure as fail, first attempt in learning. Of course, you're going to fail the first time you try to learn something, and you have to give yourself that grace and that space to try things, learn, not succeed, change, iterate, and try again. And that's how you really become successful.
Yeah, because it's like a whole loop. It's like a little while loop there, because until, you figure out what you're, messing up on, try to figure out those lessons, that's when you're going to achieve that success.
Absolutely.
And if you could step into my shoes or your younger self, what would you have asked yourself that I didn't?
I think the thing that I discovered much later in life than I should have was mentoring and networking. Those are things that everybody should be doing and starting earlier. And I mean it from both ends of the spectrum. You should be mentoring other people, and you should be receiving mentoring. And that can be from a boss, but that can also be a peer mentor. Your friends have skills that you don't have, and you can learn from them. And so this mindset of, you don't have to be an expert in everything. You can learn from all these other people. There's a lot of expertise in the room, and your opportunity, right, is to go out there and engineer serendipity. Put yourself in places where you can learn from other people. Ask them interesting questions like, how did you survive when you made a mistake? How did you recover from a mistake? What was your process? How do you make decisions? There's a lot of really interesting questions that you can get. And not everything you hear you're going to agree with either. So that's another myth of mentoring, is that you're going to have to take this advice. No, you don't have to take the advice. You may get conflicting advice. What you are getting is different ways of thinking about a problem, and then you choose the solutions that work the best for you.
Yeah, definitely. Because there's like so many things that we can learn from each other. I kind of was pretty stubborn. In my mind, ever since I was a kid, I thought that only I could do this specific problem and I don't need the help of other people. And I shouldn't be asking other people about feedback. I was really bad at receiving feedback. But just knowing and becoming the journalist that you are, asking those questions from people that are experienced from you, because they're most likely willing to help you, but also kind of returning that favor, finding people that might be struggling or that might need help, or you could envision yourself in their shoes, trying to give that upper hand, that lending hand to them, and just, becoming the better version of who you might be.
Absolutely. And sometimes people just get really stuck because they don't know how. So they're afraid to ask questions because they don't want to look stupid, right? Like, I should know this, so I shouldn't ask questions. So how do you get outside your comfort zone and become comfortable with asking these questions? That's something that happens with practice. But I think there's other things around mentoring and networking. It's an activity where it's a little bit of a numbers game. You have to ask a lot of people, and surprisingly, a large percentage of them will help you, but you have to be willing to kind of do it as a habit, as a practice. When you're in spaces, introduce yourself. When you are at events, connect with people on LinkedIn, because you never know which of those connections might turn out to be truly valuable later. And just being able to give somebody feedback on a talk or give feedback on their article, you're actually providing them with value rather than just asking them for help.
Yeah, I mean, just trying to raise your hand or come out of your bubble, or just talking to people at new meetings, conferences, because it could be hard. I mean, I'm an introvert myself, and it is kind of hard to talk to people, but just pressing that LinkedIn button for a request, or typing in some feedback and sending that email, those types of skills will slowly build up and it'll become really valuable in the future.
And if you have trouble talking about yourself or boasting about yourself, talk about your projects, talk about your team. It's so much easier to be effusive and generous about your team and what you're doing and what the product is and what the service is. That makes it a lot easier for, I think, introverts to talk about these things, because it's not that focus on yourself when you're doing it.
Absolutely. And my question for you is, what are the best resources slash books that have helped you find your career path?
So I'm going to give you 5, because these were literally game changing. And again, quite late for me to discover, but early for you all to get out there and read. The first one is Invisible Women by Caroline Carrito Perez. And this book really looks at how the world was designed for the average male, down to the height of a step or the size of a power tool. So it's not that we're less capable, it's these things weren't designed for our physique. Crash test dummies were designed based on the average male, so women tend to be more injured in car accidents because of that. So read Invisible Women. It's amazing how many places this shows up, and you will be very surprised. Algorithms of Oppression by Safiya Noble looks at how Google is not a public good. It's a profit-making company, and some of those searches are very biased, very unfortunate, and without people holding them accountable, they don't correct these problems. It's a fascinating story. One of the early innovators in algorithms and understanding AI was Cathy O'Neil, and she wrote the book Weapons of Math Destruction, another good foundational book. And similarly, Meredith Broussard did Artificial Unintelligence, which is really important to understand that computers are learning from us. They're not intelligent. They don't make decisions yet anyway. And so understanding the limitations is really important. And then the last one I have to throw out isn't there yet, so I haven't read it yet. Joy Belluini, who started the Algorithmic Justice League, looked at facial recognition software and how it worked less well for women and people of color. She's coming out with a book called Unmasking AI, My Mission to Protect What is Human in the World of Machines. So I haven't read it yet, but it's coming out soon and I'm excited for it.
I absolutely love that. I'm going to definitely check out all 5 of them, and I'm going to definitely give you feedback about them, but they seem super interesting. And guys who are listening, definitely listen to these reads and definitely check them out.
Fantastic. Like I said, it was game changing for me. You don't know what you don't know. And then you read these and suddenly you can't unsee it. You see it in everywhere, and it's fascinating.
I love those types of books. I just love them. And my question for you is, what do you think is a vital factor that shaped your career? What was your life before learning it, and what was your life after learning it?
One of my very early jobs was at the Learning Company. It was an educational software company. And I was in a junior role reporting to a manager. And I found a problem in the project that we were working on, and I looked at it very carefully and I documented it and I had all the information, and I went to my boss and I said, look, I was very proud. Like I felt like I'd done a good job, right? Here's the problem. Here's all the aspects of the problem. And she just stopped and she just looked at me and she said, and what are we going to do about it? And I looked like a deer in the headlights. I like, what? She's like, don't just bring me problems, bring me solutions. And she said, if you don't know the solution, come with questions, come with a couple options, and I'll help you decide, what is the approach to do. But that really stuck with me early on as, bring solutions, not problems. It teaches you to be, solution oriented. It teaches you to take ownership and have agency to make change and be actionable, right? To think about your work as, how am I helping to achieve the goal of the company? So I think that was a pretty good turning point, because it totally blindsided me. I really thought I had done such a good job. And then I'm like, oh, I missed the boat.
Yeah, because a lot of the times we try to identify these problems, or we find these problems, but when we share it to the higher ups or we share it to people, they kind of forget about it and they're wondering where's the solution. So just try to become more oriented towards the solutions, how to make whatever it is you're trying to do a better thing. And it doesn't have to be that much of a tweak, but just trying to figure out, oh, what can fix this or how can I do this better, can really help you set yourself up for success.
And here's the thing, because of your lived experience, you will see problems from different lenses and different perspectives than the people that you work with. Being a novice junior employee, you haven't been indoctrinated into how things are done and certain ways of doing things. So you're going to ask better questions because you're looking at it from the outside. So understanding your own value, understanding that your perspective matters and that it brings value to the table when you're designing new products and services, you're actually seeing things that they might not otherwise see.
Yes, regardless of who you are or what your background is, you have a voice and you can bring a fresh perspective to whatever you're doing because of what you've experienced in your life.
It's so important. And I think oftentimes people underestimate their skills and abilities. And you really need to reflect on, what do I have? What do I know? How can I apply that in interesting and new ways? And what is not already being discussed? What other lenses are being presented? I see it from a different way.
Yes, and because we have some additional time, my question for you is, what's one thing you wish you had known when you began your career path?
So this is maybe a surprising one, but know when to leave. I think sometimes we stay in a job too long. If you get bored, you've stayed too long. If you're not challenged, you've stayed too long. If it's not a good working environment, you hear about hostile workplaces, or you have, maybe a boss that you just, maybe nothing wrong with them, but you don't click, you don't get along with them. And we feel like we have to persevere and we have to tough it out. And sometimes that's not the answer. So I think one of the things I wish I'd known is, know when to leave, be okay. It's okay to leave and take another job if it's not the right fit for you and it's not leveraging your strengths. It's not giving you energy.
Yeah, I feel like often we try to tough it out or we try to make ourselves feel like it'll be better if we stay there longer. Um, those things are not going to really help you because you're just going to be miserable. And if you're not challenged or you're bored there, then every single day you're going to just spend 8 hours of your life doing something that you wish you wouldn't have done. So figuring that out and having the confidence to break out of that shell, because often we get too comfortable. And when you get comfortable, that's the biggest sign to like just leave because, you're going to get too easy with it. It's going to be too boring and it's not going to be fun.
And life's too short for that. You gotta go out there and have fun.
Yes. And my last question for you is, how do you continue to learn in order to stay on top of things within your role?
So I guess I would go with three things here. I've already mentioned mentoring, right? Mentoring is one of the best things you can do because you're going to see things from different perspectives. You're going to learn from colleagues. You're going to learn from different disciplines and sectors. So that's really important. Two, engineer serendipity, which means put yourself in unusual places, go to meetings, meet up with things that maybe aren't in your sector, but you could apply something you learned from it in another sector, because that's where the real interesting innovation happens, is interdisciplinary and cross-border. Some really interesting innovation comes from that. And then the third thing I think is around this idea of, asking better questions. I always think about, how might we do something rather than it's not possible. Assuming positive intent. People are trying to do the right thing. So ask them, tell me, why are you doing it? How did you come to that conclusion? So you can learn a lot of empathy by assuming positive intent. And then, as we said, throughout our conversation, be curious, follow your curiosity, do a deep dive, even if it's not required, right? Follow the thing that's interesting. So for me, when I started looking at AI, I was like, how are people using this in hiring and recruiting? And I just did a bunch of research. Nobody told me to do that. There was no dollars being paid at the end of the day, but I wanted to better understand that. And I've since used that to give talks or to do other things. It's opened doors that wouldn't have been open to me. So it was all because I was curious and I wanted to learn more.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the advice here, Jill. Before we end off, do you have any last words to the audience?
I am so excited for you because this is a really new world that's out there with AI, generative AI, all of the things that are changing in the technology space. That's going to unleash potential. That's going to give you new tools to change the world. But it's really up to you to make sure that those tools are designed for everybody to use and everyone to benefit, that there aren't disproportionate harms to society, and that there are guardrails. So you have to be the voice in the room. You have to be the one advocating to make sure that all of these new amazing technologies that we have are used for good.
Thank you so much, Jill. I absolutely love talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And here are my 3 cents on this episode with Jill. 1. Career adaptability. She emphasizes the importance of being adaptable in your career because she switched jobs every 3 years to seek growth opportunities and alignment with her values. This demonstrates that being open to change and not having a rigid career path can lead to a successful and fulfilling career. 2. Transferable skills. To succeed in a dynamic career like hers, she highlights the importance of having transferable skills such as communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and research abilities. These skills can be applied across various roles and industries, making you more versatile and resilient in your career. And 3. Diversity, equity, inclusion, or DEI perspective. In her work, Jill challenges the myth that DEI training alone can solve systemic issues. Instead, she emphasizes embedding DEI principles into the core of business operations, emphasizing that true inclusion should be built into systems from the start. This highlights the importance of a holistic approach to addressing DEI challenges. Thus, that concludes the episode for this week. If you want to know more about how I relate to these amazing topics, then stay tuned for upcoming episodes. A free way to support this show is by leaving it a 5-star rating and a review on the player you are listening to. Let me know what you enjoy about this podcast, as it's a chance to tell me what you love about the show, and it helps others discover it too. Once again, thank you for finding me, and I hope we stay in touch with each other. Zito, you're listening to Arna Sahu, the host of Arna's News. Toodles!